Welcome guys to this new tutorial video, and in this tutorial video we are going to be seeing how to handle the functionalities for the edit icon and the delete icon. So in our previous tutorial we worked on the add functionality, and now when we click on this add icon we have this pop-up modal with default data. So for the edit functionality and the delete functionality, we want to do something similar, where when we click on this edit icon we have a pop-up modal too, but that pop-up modal contains the information for that student rather than dummy data as in this case. So we want some auto-filled form to be popped up on our screen, and we edit the data, and on click on a button that data also is edited in our database. So I'm going to take us back to our code, and so far in our code we have this endpoint when we try to add a student. So we are doing a post request to this endpoint, and what it does is it goes to our database, and in the students collection we just want to append a new record or a new data record. But for an edit request or for a patch request, which is going to be the method in this case, our endpoint has kind of like an ID attached to it, and this ID in our case is going to be an integer. So this ID tells the database the particular student record we want to edit. So if we have an ID of 8, it means we want to edit the student with an ID of 8 in our database. Now the next problem is, how do we get this ID for each row of data? Because now on our table we see each row of data has this edit icon. Meaning when we click on this icon, we want to be able to get that student's ID. Now if we come back here where we are creating our table row elements, we see that each table row has this data ID property, and that's actually what gives us the ID for each table row. Meaning we'll click on an icon, because this is where we have the icons. When we click on these icons, we want to find a way to climb up to the parent TD, then up to the parent T arrow to be able to get this data ID property, and use the data ID property to do stuff like find the particular student, append the ID to the request endpoint, and stuff like that. So we're going to start by, we're actually going to start working on the functionality, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to attach an event listener to this TD. Meaning when we click on the TD, we want to do something, and I'm sure you're going to ask yourself why I'm not attaching the event listener to the icon itself, and it's simply because, well, attaching event listeners to icon is in general not good practice in code, and actually I think if you do that you are going to receive a warning, like it's not appropriate to attach an event listener to. So yeah, plus if we're attaching an event listeners to the icons, then we're actually going to have two event listeners, and having multiple event listeners in your code is actually tedious on the side of your PC. For now it might not be a big deal because we have just two event listeners, but in the future if you keep having multiple event listeners, well, it might actually tie you down. And yeah, it's generally good practice to try as much as possible to reduce the number of event listeners in your code. So with all that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and attach an event listener to this TD, and it's going to be listening for the click event. So we're going to say on click, then we want to call this function. And for now, all I want to do is I want to console log the event target, and this event target is going to permit us to, well, actually see the element on which we clicked on. We're going to go ahead and save, and we'll open our browser. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up the console. Now when I click on, say, any of these icons, let me start by clicking on the edit icon. You see the event.target shows us that we clicked on an SVG, meaning each icon is practically just an SVG. I'm going to go ahead and click on the delete icon too, and you see we have this SVG showing us that an icon is practically just an SVG element. Now I'm going to call our attention to the fact that each of these icons have this data test ID attribute or property, And this attribute helps us to know the exact icon we clicked on, because for the edit icon, we have the data test attribute being edit icon, whereas for the delete icon, the data test attribute shows us this delete outline icon, and that permits us to know exactly which icon we clicked on. Now I'm going to click on a different part of this edit icon, and when I click here, you see that I now have this path element provided to me rather than an SVG, telling us that by clicking on this icon, we can either be clicking on the SVG itself or a path. Now I'm going to come to our elements to inspect our table a little bit to see the actual placement of these elements, like where the SVG is located and where the path is located, or how the SVG differentiates from the path. So I'm just going to enter, let's say, the first row and the last TD containing our icons, and when I expand an SVG, you see we have this path inside an SVG. Now when we click on the icon, we can be clicking on an SVG or a path. So on clicking on the SVG, to be able to get this data ID attribute, which actually gives us the ID of that student in question, if I click on the SVG, then we have to climb up to the parent TD. Then from the parent TD, we climb up to the TR to be able to get this data ID attribute. But if I click on a path, we'll have to climb to the parent SVG, the parent TD, then the parent TR to get this data ID attribute, meaning the number of iterations increase. So that's it, guys. I think with that, I've called our attention to the fact that on clicking on an icon, we can be clicking on the SVG itself or the path, meaning we have to handle both actions. That's in case we click on the SVG, we have to handle that, and in case we click on the path, we have to handle that too. When we click on the TD, that's where our action takes place, or is the TD that reads the click event. So when I click here, you see it tells me that the element I clicked on is the TD, and we have that TD displayed. When I click here, it tells me I clicked on an icon, and that's the SVG displayed. Meaning if we click on the TD, then we don't want anything to happen because we have not actually clicked on a delete or edit icon. But if we click on an icon, then we have to check, is that icon a delete icon or is an edit icon? And for us to check if the icon is a delete icon or an edit icon, we have to get this data test ID property, or this data test ID attribute of that icon. If we click on a path, then we have to check, is that path the path of the edit icon or the delete icon? Meaning when we click on a path, we have to climb up to the parent SVG to be able to get. So when I click on a path, for example this path, then I have to be able to climb up to the parent SVG and get the data test ID attribute of that parent SVG to be able to determine the icon I clicked on. Was it a delete icon or an edit icon? Alright guys, so with all that out of the way, we are going to head back to our code and actually start the implementation of all these functionalities. So I'm going to start by clearing this console log function and pasting the number of functions that are going to help us to perform this functionality. So I'm going to head over to, well, let's say beneath this useEffect, and I'm going to paste these two functions. We have onDeleteClick and onEditClick. OnDeleteClick is the function I want to be called when I click on the edit icon, on the delete icon, sorry. Whereas onEditClick is the function I want to be called when I click on the edit icon. And what the delete function does is it sets the current ID to the ID I'm going to send as the parameter to that function. And this current ID tells us the current ID of the TR on which we click. While for the onEditClick, I want to set the current ID to, and I want to console log the student to edit. Meaning when I click on the edit icon, I want to console log the student to edit, or the particular student record to which that row refers to. Now this student to edit is a state, and actually I have not yet imported that state, or I have not yet defined the state. So I'm going to go ahead and do just that. And I'm going to head over to where I have this student to add state just beneath that, and I'm going to paste these two states. So we have student to edit and current ID. So as we said, student to edit is the state for the current student I want to be edited, whereas current ID holds the ID of the row or the current row on which I clicked on. So the next function I'm going to paste, guys, is the function I want to be called when I click on this TD. Because when I click on the TD, I don't know if I've clicked on an edit icon or a delete icon yet. So before that, there are a number of checks I want to perform. So the check to be able to know the icon I clicked on, and the check also to be able to get this data ID property depending on the icon I clicked on. And all of that is going to be handled by the function I'm going to pass here, and I'm just going to replace this console log by that function. And there, guys, so now when I click on this TD, what I want to do is I'm taking this event parameter and I'm passing the event parameter to this IconClick function. So what I'm going to do with this event parameter is what I'm going to be done in this IconClick function. So the next thing I have to do is I have to go somewhere above here and define or actually write that IconClick function. So I'm going to clear some space and paste the function somewhere here. Alright, so here is the IconClick function I just pasted over here, and to actually make all the function, because the function looks pretty long, so I'm going to reduce the terminal a little bit, or should I say the font a little bit, so that everything enters. And yeah, so here is the on IconClick function, and the function takes our event parameter, and what it does with that event parameter is it gets the target from the parameter. As said before, the target is the icon we clicked on, so it assigns that target to this element ID. So now element ID contains the element in question on which we clicked on, whether it's the TD element or it's an SVG or it's a path that is stored in this element ID. So now we have two other variables declared beneath. We have this parent ID variable, and this parent ID variable is going to store the data ID attribute of the parent CR. So I'm just going to write that by the side, and so yeah, it stores the data ID attribute of the parent CR, meaning after getting the parent element, or sorry, after getting the target element, later in the future we are going to use this parent ID variable to store that data ID attribute of the parent CR. It's literally going to help us to know the ID attribute of that row element, or the row element to which that icon belongs to. Next, we have this callback function, and this callback variable, well, it holds the function to be called depending on the icon that was clicked on. So now the icons in question are the delete and edit icons, and we have this on delete click and on edit click, meaning depending on what icon was clicked on, we want to assign one of these functions to this callback function, and it's that function which is going to be called when the icon is clicked on. So what we do next is we proceed to do some check, or some boolean check. Well, what we are saying here is this event.target stored in this element ID. What we are checking now is if that element, because we use this tag name to actually get the element tag. So if that tag name is a path, meaning if we click on a path, then to get the data ID attribute of the parent CR, what we need to do is we need to leave from that path up to the SVG, which is the parent element. Then from the SVG to the TD, which is the parent to that SVG. Then from the TD to the TR, which is the parent of that TD. Then call this get attribute method on that TR to get the data ID attribute of that TR. So that data ID attribute is later on stored in this parent ID. The next check we want to know is the path or the path in question. What icon is it the path of? So what we are doing is, from the path, we want to climb up to the SVG and get the data test ID attribute and compare if that data test ID attribute was a delete outline icon. Then we are going to know we click on the delete icon and we assign the callback to the onDelete click. But if it was not the delete outline icon, meaning it was an edit icon, so obviously we are going to assign the callback to the onEdit click, and it's this onEdit click which is going to be called at the end of the code or at the end of this function. Now, what happens if we didn't click on a path and we click rather on an SVG? Then what we are going to do is we are going to leave from that SVG to the parent TD, then to the parent T array, and use the get attribute method to get the ID of that T array. So that is stored in the parent ID, and next we proceed to do the same thing. That's, we'll check if the SVG was actually the SVG for the delete icon or the edit icon. So here we don't need to iterate because, well, in the case of a path, we have to iterate up to the parent element to be able to call this get attribute of data test ID to know the SVG on which we clicked on. But if we click on an SVG, then we call this get attribute directly on that SVG to be able to get this data test ID attribute, which is going to tell us the icon on which we clicked on. In case we click on a delete icon, then we do the same. We assign the delete click function to the callback function. And if we didn't click on the delete outline icon, then since as we have just two icons, obviously we would have clicked on an edit icon, and in that case we assign that edit click function to the callback function. So when all of this is done, what we are doing now at this next step is we are checking if the value of parent ID and callback are not null, because initially when you declare these two variables, well, they are given values of null because you're just declaring them, you're not assigning anything to them. So after doing all of this, we want to be sure that we actually have a value for parent ID and a value for callback before we proceed to the next step. Now, if we indeed have these values, meaning we have found the ID for the row on which we clicked on, and we accurately know the callback function we are to call, we assign parent ID to a new variable called ID. Well, this step is not really necessary. You can feel free to omit this step and use parent ID throughout the next step of this. So I assign parent ID to this ID, and what I'm doing next is, well, I'm just console logging this ID to know the ID of the row on which I clicked on. But you can also feel free, this was just for testing purposes. So what we want to do now is we need to find the student with the ID on which we clicked on. We have this found student variable which I declared here, but I iterate through all the students, and for each student I'm trying to search if the student ID is equals to this ID in question. And if the student ID is equals to that ID, then I assign found student to that student, meaning I have found that student. Well, there are other ways to do this. You might simply just want to use the find method and say students.find where student ID is equals to ID. That's another way to do that. Feel free to use any of them. So when I find that student now, what I want to do is I want to set the student to edit to be the student I just found. So if I found that student, then I want to set student to edit to be the found student. That's the student I just found. Else, I want to leave student to edit to what it is. Well, that's just this default state over here. That's in case I didn't find the student. But well, we are going to find the student in most cases. So this is really just for, how can I call it? Just to be for certainty, to be sure that we don't have a null value in this student to edit state. So that's what we do. We first of all declare this empty student. Then when we go ahead and find the student who has that ID, we assign that student to this found student. Then here we are setting out the state of the student to edit to be the student we found. And later on, this student to edit state containing the student or the data for that found student is going to be filled in the form. So The next thing we are doing after setting the student to edit to be the student we found is we are calling now this callback function, passing along the ID, and that ID is the ID for that row. And depending on if it was a click or an edit icon we clicked on, this callback function is going to call the appropriate function. Meaning in doing all of this, if we saw that we clicked on a click icon, callback is going to contain the edit click function, and is the edit click function which is going to be called alongside this ID. Whereas if we clicked on a delete icon, then throughout this validation, callback is going to be assigned to the onDelete click function, and is the onDelete click function which is going to be called. So that's how I was able to manage this edit functionality by assigning an event listener to the TD. Then here in my code, I'm checking inside that TD the icon on which I click or the element on which I click. If it was a path, then I iterate up to the parent C arrow to get the ID. I also iterate up to the parent SVG to know the icon on which I clicked on. And now, depending on the icon on which I clicked on, I'm assigning the appropriate function to this callback function. And it's that callback function which is called at the end of the code alongside the ID of that parent row. So if we observe now these functions back once more, we see that if we indeed click on a delete icon, then I'm passing this ID to this onDelete click function. Now, inside this onDelete click function, what I'm doing is I'm setting this current ID state to be the ID I receive here as a parameter. And we know that here in this callback, when I pass the ID, this ID is the ID of the parent CR, means I've successfully found that parent CR, and I can now use this current ID, because this current ID is the state I'm going to use to be deleting data later on in my code. So on delete click, I know that this is the row I want to delete. So I'm setting current ID to be that ID, and later on I'm going to call a delete function which is going to help me to delete that row. So after setting current ID to be this ID, what I'm doing is I call the handle open function on the delete modal, and this is going to open the delete modal. It was same for the when I was calling the handle open function for the add modal, because I think if we descend here to this add student, this is the add student icon. So we'll click on this icon, we want to open the add modal. So we call handle open for the add modal. The same thing over here. When I call the on delete click, meaning I clicked on a delete icon, I want to open the delete modal at the end of all of that. Now for edit click, meaning if I clicked on an edit icon, I receive this ID. So I'm still setting current ID to ID, and what I'm doing is I'm opening the edit modal. So the next thing we have to do, guys, is to create these two modals. That's the delete modal and the edit modal, because we don't have those yet in our code. So we have to create them such that when this function calls, when we call this callback function alongside this ID, we do all of this and we open the appropriate modals. So I'm just going to come beneath this code, and actually can minimize all of these things as we're not using the table for now and the add modal. So I'm just going to come beneath this add modal and paste these two new modals. And here we go. I'm going to arrange this a little bit. We now have this edit modal and the delete modal. So when I click on the edit icon and we call the handle open for the edit modal, it's going to open this modal, since as this validation in here is going to be true, meaning open is indeed the open state is indeed going to be equals to edit modal. So this is going to resolve to true, and this modal is going to be open. Now in the edit modal, it's pretty similar to the add modal we saw in the previous video. It has input fields for all our different properties in the student to edit object. So we have an input field for the name, and that input field as value, it has the student to edit, meaning after setting this state over here in this on IconClicked, so after finding that student and we set the student to edit to be the found student, this form now is going to open, or this modal containing the form is going to be open, and the name or the name text field is going to have that student's name, since as now student to edit is going to be that found student, meaning that name text field is going to have the student's name or the student for that row's name. And we have this unchanged event handler, and it does same like in the case of adding student. Unchanged, we want everything to change except the student's name. So we have all of that jazz. It's literally the same as for the student to add. So we have one text field for the name, another text field for the matricle, one for the age, which is a number text field, one for, I think that's what do we get, the level, and another for the gender, and these are select fields. So that's just it, guys. That's practically it for the edit modal. And for the delete modal, this one is a bit different because we just want to have this text of, are you sure you want to remove this student? And we have two buttons. The first button says yes, and the second button says, well, no. That's if you don't want to remove the student. Then if you click on this button, you have this onClick event handler, and it handles close, meaning it closes the modal and the action is cancelled. But if you click on yes, then we want to call this handle delete row function with the current ID. As I told you guys, the current ID state was going to hold the ID of the student to be deleted. For now, we don't yet have these functions, so we're not going to use them, but I'm just going to save to see the progress we have so far in our browser and where all of this takes us. So before doing that, I'm going to console, I'm going to comment these functions so that they don't actually give us errors, since as we don't have them yet. So I'm just going to do this, and here in the edit modal, I'm going to do same. So we have the edit modal, and at the end of this modal, we have two buttons too. That's one button for save changes. That's after editing the student. If you save changes, then this handle edit row function is going to be called with the student's ID. And another one for cancel, which handles close and closes the modal. So I'm going to comment this function too. So I'm just going to save, and we're going to click on the icons to see what we have so far. So we're going to save and open our browser. And now if we click on these icons, we actually get the information. We actually get the pop-up modal with for editing with the student's information already filled in it. And now we can edit that information as we want. And if we click on this button, nothing happens because I actually commented the functions which have to be called when the save button is clicked on. But if we cancel, the modal closes. And same for the delete button. When I click on this delete button, we have just this typography component. Are you sure you want to delete the student? And if I say no, well, it does not delete that student. So now what we are going to do is we are going to return to our code and uncomment these functions. So we're going to uncomment that for the edit modal. Open this delete modal as well, uncomment this function. And now we're going to write these functions, or more like paste them, so that, well, they're actually called when the buttons are clicked on. So I'm going to come beneath the handle add row function and paste the two functions, and that's the handle edit row function and the handle delete row function. So when the save changes button is clicked on, this is the function which is being called, and what we are doing is we are doing a patch request to this endpoint, or to this link. So as you can see, we are just concatenating our ID onto this other half of the link we have above. So this is going to give us the complete route to which we are doing this patch request. So we have the headers, that's content type, application JSON, and we are stringifying the student to edit. So we're not actually stringifying the whole student to edit, because as we can see, the student to edit state over here has an ID property of 0. So we're not actually using this ID state or this ID property. So that's why it's not included in the body to be stringified for this edit object. So we just want to stringify the name, the matrical, age, date of birth, and this. When you send this request, it automatically knows the object is going to be the object it wants to edit. So you don't actually have to send that ID along with it. You can send the ID if you wish, but yeah, it's not really necessary. So we're just going to leave that out for the moment. So when that's done and we get that response, you want to get the data from that response, which is actually the JSON. So when you get that data, we're going to receive an alert of successful. Then we reload the page so that we actually have that new data on our table. So same for the delete. When you delete, you are sending a delete request to this route, and that's the ID. So the kind of route is similar to that for a patch request, and you don't actually need any headers or any of that jazz. So you're just sending a delete request. There's not body to be sent along with the delete request, because what you want is actually to remove that whole record from your database. So if the delete request is done successfully, or if the response is okay, you have this alert of student done, and you just have to practically reload your page to see that student gone. Else, if something happened and you are not able to delete the student, then it's going to close the modal after giving you this alert of student could not be deleted. Oof. So now we're going to save and test all of this if the edit and delete functionalities are implemented successfully. So let's just save now and open our browser. And now if I click on this and change the name John Doe to just John, and let's save the changes, and it says successful. If we click on OK, our page actually reloads, and we have that John Doe changed to John. So our edit functionality changes successfully. So let's just do another one. Let's come down to Bob Brown, and let's change to maybe Bob something. Just edit this matrical somehow, change the age, the gender to female, and yeah, all of that. So if we do that and we click on save changes, then so we get will be something with the change matrical and all of that. So the edit functionality pretty much works. So I'm going to now do for the delete. So now if I delete this record of Bobby something, so it asks us, you want to remove the student, and if I click on yes, student deleted, and now we don't get Bobby something anymore. So you see it's omitted that record of 4. Now the edit and delete functionalities are pretty much done, but we still have the problem of the page reloading or refreshing each time we edit or delete any row from our data table. So to handle that, I'm going to return to our code, and starting with the handle edit row function. Here, after receiving the edited student or this data, because this data is actually the edited student from our response, I'm going to replace all this action, including the reload statement, with this new set of code. So I'm going to take this out. Yeah, so I'm going to take all the console logs out. So what we are doing is, when we receive, each time we edit a student and that action is successful, we are going to close the modal, and then we are going to find the student in our code who has the same ID as the student returned to us by JSON server. Now, when we find that student, what we want to do is we literally want to replace that student, or replace that student in our student data. And to replace the student, we need the index of that student. So after finding the student who has the same ID as the student returned to us by JSON server, because that's the student we want to replace. That's we want to replace the old student with a new student. But we know the ID property for both students doesn't change. So when we get the student, we need the index of that student. The index of the student is basically the position of that student in the student data. So we use the index of function to find the index of that student in our students array. Then we call the splice method. And what we're saying is, hey, at this index I, because I is the index of that student, So at the index I, what we are doing is we want to delete one record and replace that record with this new record. So we're starting from the index I, we remove one student, and that's the student, or that's the old student record, and we're inserting this new student record in that position. And that's that. So now we're going to save this and test if we actually have that student change without our page refreshing. So if I come back to our browser and now let's edit John, let's send it back to the initial name, that was John Doe. And now we'll save change and we'll have this. You see, our page doesn't refresh, but we'll have that John Doe automatically. And yeah, I think that's a lot smoother than having our page refresh each time we do. So let's just do another demo. So we're going to change this to male, change the name to, let's say, Peter Grill. And if we save that, so we see the name changes to Peter Grill, and yeah, it's starting to look better than having the page being refreshed. Now we have to do the same for the delete, because now when we delete, our page literally still refreshes. So we have to handle that too. And to do that, I'm going to come to our code, and this one is pretty much easier to do because all we have to do is to just replace this location.reload with this one line of code. So well, we're going to actually take away that, and all we're doing is we're setting our students in our application, that's the new students we want to have, to be the old students. So we're filtering our old students for any student, for all the students without the ID used as the parameter. So this ID is the ID for the student we want to delete. So we want to filter all the students without that ID and set them as our new students in our application. And actually by doing this, since as we are setting a state, you know that our page is rendered each time we set a state. So yeah, when this is done, we are going to have these students, that's the students without this ID, as the new students in our application, and that's what's going to give us without our page being refreshed. So if we save this and test this out in our browser, we'll do all of that. So we see that student goes away without our page being refreshed. And let's try again with our next record of 8, and yeah, so the student still gone away. And with that, guys, now we have all our functionalities for adding, editing, and deleting in place. So we can add a student, or have this default modal with no student name, no matricle, just a default age and all of these, as well as edit the student, where we have the student's information being filled automatically for us, and we can just edit whatever we want to edit on the student, as well as delete a student. So where we have this pop-up modal, and we can remove the student from our application. So I'm pretty much sure this video was a bit more complicated to get and not as straightforward as the others, but I hope you guys understood well my reasoning behind um, the edit and delete logic, because of course there are other ways to implement editing and deleting on this table, but I hope you guys understood how I managed to perform editing and deleting of records on a data table. And with that, we have come to the end of this video. So if the video helped you guys to understand how to edit or delete records on a data table, as well as if the past videos have helped you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more videos, and see you guys in the next video, where we are going to be talking about searching. Meaning in the next video we are going to see how to implement this search bar, because for now it does nothing, but we're actually going to see how to search for records on our data table and have the search records displayed on the data table. Thank you guys for watching, and see you in the next tutorial.